We continue, we left off. We're going to finish today, chapter 5 in Zvachim. The Mishnah chapter discusses the sacrifices in the temple. Page 24. So we're up to Shlamim, the peace offerings. So we have two types of offerings. You have the burnt offerings, and then you have the peace offerings. Specifically within the peace offering, you have the Thanksgiving offering, which we read earlier. And what this represents in our own personal temple, our own personal service of Hashem, is we have those parts in our life which are holy, sacred, like the oil is totally burnt off in its entirety. So when you're dealing with holy things, I'm studying a holy Torah, I'm doing a holy mitzvah, I'm doing an act of kindness. Then you have the shlamim. The shlamim, the peace offering, which is called a peace offering because a portion of the animal is offered as an offering. Part of it is given to the Kohen, and the overwhelming majority of the sacrifice is eaten by the owners. So it makes peace. It's a combination of man and God and man. It's for yourself and it's for Hashem. This represents the majority, overwhelming majority of our time, of our life, our adult life is occupied and engaged 6 days a week. You should work. Majority of our life is engaged in our mundane activities. We're eating, we're drinking, we're sleeping, we're surviving, we're paying bills. So we're not doing ostensibly, we're not doing anything holy or sacred, we're just going about our daily lives. And that's what the peace offering empowers us, that we should make peace, that we should also, everything that we do, our engagement in the physical and material world, we should also offer as a sacrifice. It should also be connected with Hashem. Whatever we do, we should inject the theme. All our actions should be for the sake of heaven. We should think about Hashem, whatever we do. And whatever we do, we should get to know Hashem. So that godliness, our Yiddishkeit should permeate every part of our life. It should not be compartmentalized when we do something Jewish on a holy day and on a special occasion. But as we go about our daily life, ordinary life, everything that we do should be connected with Hashem. That's what the peace offering represents, the shlamim. So he says, Shlamim Kedoshim Kalim. It's a lesser sanctity. You can slaughter it any place in the courtyard, anywhere in the courtyard. It doesn't have to be on the northern side of the courtyard, the northern side of the altar. It could be in the south of the altar, west of the, east of the altar, and even west of the altar, and even the west of the temple. Anywhere in the courtyard. And you sprinkle the blood, and where you sprinkle it is again, you sprinkle it in the two corners. You sprinkle it on the northeast corner, so then the blood splashes again, touches the eastern wall and the northern wall, and then you splash it on, and then you sprinkle it on. You sprinkle it on the southwest corner, so then the blood splashes and reaches and touches the southern wall of the altar as well as the western. So all four sides of the altar is touched by the blood. So you surrounds the altar. And you can eat it anywhere in Jerusalem. And anyone is allowed to eat. There's no sanctity. Yes, it has to be eaten in Jerusalem. You're not allowed to take it out outside of Jerusalem. But anyone can eat it. You don't have to be a Kohen. Levite, the owners, you can eat it however you like. It doesn't have to be roasted, it can be barbecued. You can eat it cooked, raw, however you like it. You get to eat it for 2 days, meaning the day that you offer the sacrifice, at night, and the next day. Now, if you violate this, you leave over, then you have to burn it. If you leave over the next morning, the second day, in the morning, till dawn, then you have to burn it. But you're only allowed to eat it till the evening of the second day. Why didn't the rabbis here make a decree? Just like they made a decree, sacrifices that are allowed to be eaten the day that you offer the sacrifice, and the following night, the rabbi said you're not allowed to eat until dawn. You must finish eating by midnight, because they were worried if you're going to allow it to eat till the deadline, you may come to pass the deadline. Jews tend to be late, so you may just pass the deadline and violate prohibition. Why don't you say the same thing? You should make a fence. You're only allowed to eat it till noontime. If you're going to allow to wait till the last minute, why do something now if you can do it tomorrow? You can do it later. This is a Jewish motto. So why aren't the rabbis worried? So the answer is because there's a big difference. There at night, there's two worries. Firstly, you're going to fall asleep. With your best intentions, you're up all night. Of course, you meant to eat it, and you're careful, and you're looking at the watch. But before you know it, especially those who are up at night know that the end of the night is the most difficult part to stay up. The drowsiness just overwhelms you. So you're just going to fall asleep. Therefore, the rabbi said till midnight. Here, no one is worried you're going to fall asleep in the middle of the day. You're not the imposter that you're falling asleep all the time. You're not falling asleep in the middle of the day. So you're not worried about that. The rabbis weren't worried. Secondly, the problem is at night, even with your best intentions, even if you're wide awake, it's hard to distinguish between before dawn and after dawn. Dawn is not clearly distinguishable. Not sunrise, it's dawn, 72 minutes before sunrise. It's still dark outside. So to make that distinction, it's such a subtle distinction, with the naked eye, it's almost impossible to detect the difference between when the deadline is, when night ends and the day begins and dawn begins. But evening is very easy to detect. It turns dark. It's light and then it turns dark. So there's no confusion. So you're not worried that someone by mistake, by accident, going to miss the deadline and not eat it in time. So that's why there's no reason to make any decree or any fancy. You can eat it the full time. It's allotted to you. It's biblically allotted to you. The Torah allows you to eat it the day, the night, and the next day till evening. Same rule applies. The parts of the animal, the peace offering is given to the kohen. The breast and the front leg, the right front leg, it's given to the kohen. So also, the kohen can eat it for the 2 days and the night in between. You can eat it anywhere in Jerusalem. The only difference is Ella, but Amurim, the part that's given to the kohen, is sacred. So who's allowed to eat it? But it's not like sacrifices of a greater sanctity, of a holy country. The parts of the sin offering or the guilt offering of the kohen eats. There, it has to be eaten inside the temple, and only the male kohen allowed to eat from it. Here, the family of the kohen is allowed to also participate. An Israelite is not allowed to eat it. It's sacred. But the kohen, anyone who's part of his family, Nechel HaKohanim, Shamurim Nechel HaKohanim, the kohen is allowed to eat it, and shame their wives, they've named their children, Ulavdeyim, and even their servants. The Canaanite servants that we learn, not the Jewish servants. The Canaanite servants that becomes part of the household, that converts and becomes like part of the household. He becomes part of the household of the master. So he's also allowed to eat. Okay, now we come to the last mission. The firstborn of a kosher animal. And the firstborn of a kosher animal, what does that represent? Spiritually, that represents the animal within the animal soul. So even the animal soul within the Jew, it's an animal. It's a firstborn animal. Is your firstborn son you have to redeem, And then there's the firstborn animal that's holy, and you have to give it to the Kohen. And as long as it has no defect, the Kohen has to offer as a sacrifice. It's sacred. The animal is sacred. This represents spiritually that even the animal soul of a Jew is holy, is different than the animal soul of a non-Jew. Different. So much so that the law of the Bechor, we're going to learn when are you allowed to eat the Bechor, how are you allowed to eat it? Do we compare it to, it's not like the sin offering and the guilt offering. The sin offering and the guilt offering, the Kohen has to eat it only that night and that day and night. But the Bechor, the firstborn, the Kohen is allowed to eat it like the peace offering. You're allowed to eat it the day that it's offered, at night, and the next day, till evening. We're not comparing it to the guilt offering and the sin offering. Because not only is the Jewish soul has no connection to sin. As the Zohar says, nefesh kisech, the nefesh, his soul, in the beginning of Leviticus, the Torah discusses the sin offering is a soul that sins. So the Zohar says the correct way to read it is with a question mark. Nefesh kisech, the tava. Is it possible a soul should sin? How can a Jewish soul sin? And nefesh, mind you, is the lowest level of the soul. There are 5 names to the soul. Nefesh, ruach, neshama, chayachid. Nefesh is the interface between the soul and the body. It's your thought, speech, and action. Even that level, you have to read it with a question mark. How is it possible for you to sin? The godly soul, can an animal jump into fire? Even by mistake. Sechta means, and you did an unintentional sin. How is it possible? When was the last time you rolled out of bed by mistake night and hurt yourself? It's not possible. How could you sin? How could the soul harm itself like that? Self-destruct. It's not. It's a question. How is this even possible? So he's saying that not only don't we compare the firstborn animal, which is holy, to a guilt offering and a sin offering, because even the animal of a Jew doesn't want to sin. The animalistic soul of a Jew is animalistic, not because he's tempted to sin. Even the animalistic of a soul of a Jew naturally is not tempted to sin, unless we're educated otherwise, and unless we choose to sin, unless because of our environment. But essentially, naturally, even the animal soul, the nature of a Jew, even our animal soul is not tempted to sin. We're tempted is that when we eat kosher and glad kosher, we love to eat it with relish, with zest. We get into the physical, into the material. But it's glad kosher. God forbid, we're never even entertained. After every says in Tanya that even the animal soul is shade in Miyadoyin, as opposed to Zohar. It's a Jewish animal. So even the shade, the demon of it, it's a Jewish demon. Not, God forbid, we're tempted to do something for him. By nature, we're just tempted to enjoy, luxuriate in our materialistic indulgence. But it's glad kosher. I would never even entertain. God forbid, how can I sin against God? Even the animal soul wouldn't think to sin against Hashem, our creator. So we don't compare the bchor, the firstborn sacrifice, to the sin offering and the guilt offering. And then he says even more so, we don't even compare it to a Thanksgiving offering. A Thanksgiving offering also could only be eaten the day of the sacrifice and that night, versus the bchor is allowed to be eaten that day of the offering, that night, and even the next day. Why don't we even compare it to the Taida? Because a Taida, spiritually speaking, you're thanksgiving. What are you giving thanksgiving? You're giving thanksgiving because you were in danger. And miraculously, you survived the threat, you survived the danger. What that means, spiritually speaking, is that you were in spiritual danger. All the 4 examples that the Torah describes in Tehillim, you could have drowned in the sea, traveling in the sea. You were in danger of drowning. You were in prison. You were in the desert, a parched desert, nothing to drink, and wild animals, and that you were sick, All of these things really, at a deeper level, on a personal level, talking about spiritual threats, spiritual dangers to the well-being and the health of our soul. Our soul could be because of the wild animals that are out there. We're thirsty, we're parched for anything spiritual, we're sick, we lust sick food, food that's no good for us. We lust things that are no good for us. We are not attracted to things that are really healthy and wholesome and good for us. It's all a sign of spiritual illness. So we thank Hashem that we were saved from all these spiritual dangers. But what saved us from these spiritual dangers? It took a miracle. It's a miracle, and that's why we're giving thanks. We make a goyma, we thank Hashem, cured us. Our life was threatened, our life was in danger. We could have died, we could have succumbed to illness, we could have drowned, we could have died from thirst, we could have died in prison. And we thank Hashem for our miraculous recovery, our miraculous freedom from prison, miraculous arriving in safety, arriving from our journey in safety. In other words, what does that mean? It took a miracle to save our soul. That it took an act of self-sacrifice. It took an heroic act to save us, to do the right thing. It took an heroic act to be able to rise above the challenges. It took a heroic act for us to be able to maintain our spiritual health and well-being. So he's saying the animal soul you're allowed to eat, it's not even compared to the Thanksgiving offering. Because from the animal soul of a Jew, it doesn't take a miracle for a Jew to listen to Hashem. It's the most natural thing. A Jew, even our animal, who's our wilde chaya, you can have a bull, you could be a bull, you could be a sheep, you could be a goat, all the different animals. But even your animal, who's an animal, but even the animal would never even entertain, would never even think of, God forbid, to endanger my spiritual health, that I would need a miracle to overcome, an act of self-sacrifice. It's not a heroic act. I'm not even tempted. The animal soul of a Jew is not even tempted to disconnect himself from Hashem. The temptation is that when the material things that you do, you enjoy a little too much, or you indulge a little too much. It's not kosher. God forbid I should do anything that violates against the code of Jewish law, the will of Hashem. So this is the Bechor. Then he says, V'maiser. Maiser is a Jew who has 10 animals, 10 kosher animals. So he has to take these 10 animals into the barn, and then he lets them out one by one. And the 10th one, he has to strike with make a red mark and declare this is the 10th animal. This is holy. This has to be offered as a sacrifice. It has to be brought to the temple and offered as a sacrifice. The entire sacrifice is eaten by the owners, but it has to be brought as a sacrifice. So we see a big difference between these two sacrifices, Bechor and Maiser. The firstborn of an animal, of a kosher animal, belongs to a Jew, is automatically holy. You don't have to do anything to make it holy. It's automatically. It's the firstborn. Maiser, the 10th one, is the last one. It's not the first one. It's the last one. It's the 10th one. And you have to make it holy. You have to gather them all. You have to count it. You have to pass before you. You have to count it. You mark it. You count it. You designate it. And then it becomes holy. If you don't count it, it's not holy. And that leads to another difference. The rabbi said that today we don't tithe. We don't do this. We don't do the Maiser. For the simple reason that we don't have a temple today. So what are you going to do? You're going to, a person, a Jew who owns animals, every 10th animal you're going to designate as a sacrifice. What are you going to do with these animals? They're holy animals. They're sacrificial animals designated as a sacrifice. There's no temple today. And an animal that's designated as a sacrifice, it's holy. You're not allowed to work with it. You can't eat it. You can't touch it. You're not allowed to offer it outside the temple. So it's going to lead to a disaster. So the rabbis say today, don't tithe. If you don't gather it, you don't count it, you don't mark it, you don't designate it, you don't call it out, then it's not a tithe, it's a regular animal. But Bechor, we do have today. A firstborn is automatically holy. Temple, no temple, doesn't matter. Whoever you are, it's holy. And you have a big problem. You have nothing you can do. It's holy. The only thing you can do is wait until it naturally develops a defect. Once it develops a defect, then you can no longer offer as a sacrifice. Then you just give it to the kohen, and then he can do whatever he wants. So what this represents, these two sacrifices represent, the Bechor represents the first level, the firstborn. What's the first level of consciousness? That's the level of Chachma, the creative spark, Chachma. But Chachma, as we learned in Tanya, chapter 3 and chapter 18, Chachma is where the godly soul resides. It's where the godly soul, the holiness of a Jew, is expressed in Chachma. Because Chachma represents a level of egolessness. You're open to something greater than yourself. There's no sense of I, it's a sense of something greater than yourself. So Chachma is the sense of Hashem, where you sense the reality of Hashem. And it's beyond comprehension. You don't fully understand. You know, that I don't exist. There is no ego. All there is Hashem. But Chachma senses that truth. Chachma senses that reality, that ego level of egolessness, the experience of egolessness, and the reality that's greater than yourself and greater than all of us together. And therefore, a Jew is ready to sacrifice his life for Hashem. That's what Chachma represents. And that's why Chachma is not something you have to create. You're born with it. You're a Jew. You're born with it. It's natural. It's innate. It's inherent. The moment you're born, you already have that holiness. You're born with that level of Chachma, that level of self-sacrifice, that ability and readiness to sacrifice your life for Hashem, to make the ultimate sacrifice. The total sense of total egolessness. There is no ego, there is no I, all there is Hashem. So much so that you're ready to give up your life for Hashem, your very being, your very existence for Hashem. Unhesitating, not even a question. And that's why you don't have to do anything. It doesn't come from us. It's not because we meditated, we were deeply religious and deeply pious, and we studied, and we came to the realization, and we came to the conclusion, and we made a decision. What realization, what conclusion, what decision? You're born with it. You're Jewish. You're born with that instinct, with that holy instinct, the connection with Hashem, the readiness to completely, totally sacrifice itself for Hashem, unhesitating. And that's why you don't have to do anything with it. And that's why that's present even today, even in times of exile. Because when it comes to the readiness of a Jew to sacrifice his life for Hashem, we call that Pintel Yid, that core and essence that makes us Jewish. There's no difference, temple, no temple. Doesn't matter. Jews are an exalted level, or it's a tremendous darkness, and Jews in a very low level. That's there's no difference. A Jew at any moment is ready to sacrifice. Exile, no difference. A Jew is the same Jew today as he was when he stood at Sinai, when we left Egypt, crossed the sea, crossed the Jordan, stood in the temple, stood with Isaiah. There's no difference. The core and essence of a Jew is the same. The Jew hasn't changed one iota. The essence, the Pintel Yid, what makes us Jewish, the Jew within us, which is represented by the Bechor, that's something that comes from above. We're born with it, we have it, it's intact, it's whole, it's perfect, it's untouchable, undiluted, unchanging. Versus the Meiser. The Meiser represents the 10th level. What's the lowest level? The 10 faculties within a person. Meiser is the interface. It's thought, speech, and action. It's our interaction with the world outside of us. Thinking, speaking, and acting. Meiser is something that we have to sanctify. We have to make a choice, and we have to sanctify our thought, speech, and action. And really, that's all we have the power to sanctify. because we do have the control, we do have self-control. Even if we don't feel godly, we don't experience godliness. And emotionally, and mentally and psychologically, we're not there, we don't feel it, we don't sense it, we don't have that deep perception and deep understanding and that passionate, powerful feeling, emotional attraction and feeling and connection with Hashem. But we have that ability of self-discipline, of choosing to live Jewish, to act Jewish, to speak Jewish, and to think. So we are obligated to sanctify ourselves. That's the Ma'aseh. That's represented by the Ma'aseh. On the other hand, we don't have that. We don't have Ma'aseh today, because Ma'aseh also means sanctifying all 10 levels, all 10 of our faculties. In the times of the temple, we had the ability to sanctify all 10 parts of our faculties, every aspect, our brain, our mind, our heart. Today, we don't have that same ability. There's a destruction, there's a darkness, there's an exile. We're exiled from ourselves. We're not in touch even with ourselves. We don't have the power. Therefore, the Torah says today you don't have to do Ma'aseh. And this is the conclusion of the book of Leviticus. The book concludes with Ma'aseh. The very last mitzvah in the book of Leviticus is mitzvah 361, and it talks about the mitzvah of Ma'aseh, tithing. You're not allowed to redeem the tithe. Once you designated the tithe, it's a sacrifice, and you have to offer it as a sacrifice. How does the book of Leviticus begin? Adam ki yaakov mikan, a person who will draw you near to them. Without the Rebbe asked, it should have said Adam, as all the commentaries asked, should have said Adam mikem ki yaakov, person from amongst you offer a sacrifice. Instead, it says Adam ki yaakov, a person who will offer a sacrifice, mikem, from you. And I've explained that he's referring to, Adam refers to Hashem. We're created in the image of God. The image of the chariot, they saw the image of Adam sitting on the chariot. It refers to Hashem. And we are Adam, we're created in the image of Hashem. So the Torah is teaching us on a deeper level. Korban, the sacrifice, comes from the word in Hebrew, kiruv, to draw close. But who takes the initiative? First, Hashem draws us close. He pulls us in. Adam ki yaakov, and Hashem will draw us close. When there's an awakening from above, when Hashem sees that we're lost and we're asleep, He wakes us up very gently. He gives us a free sample. And then He says, now that I've awakened you, now it's time, mikem. Now take from yourself and nabhema, from your animal, and now offer yourself, sacrifice yourself, generate, develop an arousal from below. Because it's arousal from above doesn't have any sustaining power. Unless you put your finger, unless you exert some effort, unless you participate, it's not going to last. Easy come, easy goes. The arousal from above will come and go. And it will fade away and it won't leave any impression. In order, now that you have this arousal, the purpose is that it should awaken you. Now awaken yourself. Grab the bull by the horn and change. Make a dent in yourself. Make a decision to change. So the book of Leviticus, which is all about sacrifice, starts with sacrifice and ends with sacrifice. But it starts with the idea that Hashem takes the first step. He makes the first move. He awakens us. And that's also represented by B'chor. B'chor, as we said, first he says B'chor and then Ma'aseh. B'chor is the firstborn. B'chor is something that comes from above. It's automatically sacred. Hashem makes it sacred. That represents the godly soul that's sacred on its own, an awakening that comes from above. The ability to self-sacrifice is pintele yid. We're born with it. We didn't earn it. We have it. We're just born with it. It's given to us free of charge. Then the Torah concludes with the sacrifice of Maisa. The Torah concludes with a sacrifice where we have to roll up our sleeves and we have to act and we have to make a sacrifice. And the reason why the Torah concludes with that is because that's the whole point. That's the whole purpose. And it's more precious to Hashem. The whole purpose of creation is because Hashem wanted us to change. He wanted us to change personally. He wants us to change the world around us. And when we change, and when the world around us changes, then Hashem changes. Prayer is a substitute for sacrifice. Prayer is when we offer our sacrifice. So when we offer our animal in prayer, when we change our characteristic traits and personality, our animal soul. And then we change the world around us. We change the nature of the world around us. Then Hashem also changes. We avert the terrible decree, and we have the ability through prayer. We have the ability to create a change, to change our destiny. That's the whole purpose of creation. That's what Hashem desired. That's what Hashem wanted. That's why prayer is called service. We're servicing Hashem. We're giving him what he wants. That's the whole purpose of creation, that we should change. And it all begins with consciousness. When you change and you become conscious of Hashem, you're conscious of godliness, and you respond, and you're praying, and you're connecting, and you're elevating, and you're climbing the ladder, and you're changing, then that's the whole purpose of creation. That's what Hashem desires. So we're giving Hashem his ultimate pleasure. So in a way, that's why the Torah concludes with the Meiser, the sacrifice. Leviticus concludes with the sacrifice of Meiser, because that captures the essence of what sacrifice is all about, what the ultimate purpose is. And this is much deeper. Of course, an arousal that comes from above is much higher. Abundance. It's a divine benevolence. It's grace from Hashem. The arousal that comes from below is much more precious, much deeper. It gives Hashem tremendous pleasure. And that's the ultimate reason why it's lasting. Not only because we made a dent in ourselves, we made a vessel, a vehicle to sustain that awakening. But our awakening triggers a much deeper response from Hashem. The awakening that comes after our awakening is much deeper than the awakening, the initial awakening that comes by way of grace of Hashem. Nothing to do with us, not of our doing, not of our making. Which shows us it comes from a very lofty level. That Hashem is not affected by our apathy and by our indifference and by our behavior. Hashem awakens us and loves us, and he tries to awaken us. So it comes from a very lofty level, but it doesn't compare to the awakening from above that comes in response to our awakening. That's a much deeper, much more profound awakening, and that's longer lasting, that's more permanent, because it's when we awaken ourselves, triggers the deepest response within Hashem. This is the pleasure of Hashem. This is his desire. That's the whole purpose why he created the world. So we are fulfilling his pleasure, fulfilling his desire. We're giving him what he needs and what he wants. So that's the ultimate, the climax, the culmination of the whole book of sacrifice. The whole book of Leviticus is with mice, the sacrifice of mice. Then Pesach. The sacrifice of Pesach. Sacrifice of Pesach is fascinating. Because on one hand, it's a very individual sacrifice. Every family every Jew had to offer the sacrifice, and every Paschal sacrifice, a lamb or whatever it was, is only allowed to be eaten by the members who were designated. It had to be designated, members in this sacrifice. In Egypt, there was every family. Every family ate their own sacrifice. Every family was quarantined. They stayed at home. They were quarantined at home, and they ate their own sacrifice. Even in the temple, every sacrifice had to have a designated group. You couldn't just move around this sacrifice, the other sacrifice. No, you have to be designated, and the only ones who are allowed to eat it are those who were designated from beforehand on this sacrifice. They're the only ones who are allowed to eat from this sacrifice. So it was like very individual, highly individual. So it was like a personal sacrifice, an individual sacrifice. Every Jew is obligated to bring. You could become a member. You don't have to bring your own sacrifice. You can make a member, a family, a friend, whatever, and you all bring one animal together, one sacrifice together. It's fine. But it was for those people and those people only. So it's very individualistic. On the other hand, the Paschal lamb, the Paschal sacrifice, is also viewed as a communal sacrifice. It's a combination. It's a communal sacrifice and it's a private sacrifice. Why would it be viewed as a communal sacrifice? Because the entire Jewish people were physically together in the temple, bringing the sacrifice at the same time. It all had to be brought at the same time. The afternoon of the 14th of Nisan, right before Pesach, had to be brought that afternoon, and then everyone had to eat it in their groups, in their own individual groups. They had to eat it that night. Everyone ate it together. Everyone brought it together. So, and it was a designated time. It's not like the other individual sacrifice, other personal, private sacrifice. I could bring a burnt offering whenever I volunteer, whenever I want. Thanksgiving offering, peace offering. But here, and even the individual sin offerings, whenever I sin, whenever I bring it, or the guilt offerings, but here it was like a communal sacrifice. Communal sacrifices had a designated time, like Shabbos or Chodesh, holidays. This also has a designated time. And everyone was physically together in the temple offering the sacrifice. Everyone was eating together the sacrifice in Jerusalem at the same time, in their own personal groups. So it was a very interesting combination. And Pesach was so fundamental, such a fundamental sacrifice. It's the only sacrifice that even though there was a designated time, usually any sacrifice that has a designated time, if you blow it, if you don't offer it, it's too late. I missed the boat, missed the plane, it's gone, it's over. But I couldn't bring it. Okay, you missed the plane, you couldn't make it, there was traffic. Okay, well, what can I do? You missed it, there's nothing I can do. Pesach is the only sacrifice where you get a second chance. The Jewish people who couldn't bring, those individual Jews who couldn't bring the Pesach, cried to Hashem, how can we miss out on the Pesach? And Hashem gave them a second chance. Why this sacrifice? This sacrifice, you must make sure to bring a Pesach. Because Pesach is the birth of the Jewish people. It's the birthday of the Jewish people. That's when we became a people. Hashem took us out of Egypt. It's the birth of holiness. It's the foundation. So I can't be a Jew unless I bring a carbon Pesach. It's like I'm missing the cornerstone. I'm missing the foundation. If you're missing the foundation, you have nothing to build on. Pesach is the foundation of holiness. That's why even the convert has to celebrate Pesach. Why does the convert have to celebrate Pesach? His ancestors weren't in Egypt. You're sitting in that God. Our ancestors were in Egypt, were in slavery. Your ancestors were in Egypt. You're not Jew. You weren't born Jewish. But he's part of the Jewish people. It's the birth of holiness. To anyone who's a Jew, it doesn't matter whether biologically and physically you are the biological descendants of those original Jews who were physically in Egypt. But spiritually, holiness was in bondage. Holiness was in prison. And there was a birth of holiness, a breakthrough, a miraculous freeing of holiness, an exposure of holiness. And Egypt was crushed, and holiness in the Jewish people and their faith emerge in all its glory and all its beauty. And this repeats itself each and every Pesach. Each and every year we have to relive and re-experience, and even a higher level, that very same experience. Every year you have to have the birth and the birth of Judaism, the birth of the Jewish people, the birth of holiness. And if you don't participate in that, then I can't participate in anything else that follows. It's essential. I can't live without it. That's why they cried, how can we miss out on the Korban Pesach? It's not possible. And because the Korban Pesach is so essential, that's why we find these two characteristics about the Korban Pesach. Because this is so essential, this defines Judaism. This is what tells us that Judaism is emes. Judaism is unique. It's not like any other ism. And all other isms. And that's how you know it's a false ism. All these isms are false isms. How do you know it's a false ism? In all these false isms, you sacrifice the individual for the community. In the name of ideology, all the communists agreed. That's the gift that the Jewish people unfortunately gave to the world. I think you should edit that out for those who hear it. But between us, we can say it. All the communists, they were ready to sacrifice 20 million Russians for the sake of communism, for the purity of the ideology. In Bolshevik, in Soviet Russia and Soviet America. In the name of communism, they're ready to sacrifice individuals, lose their jobs, lose their livelihood, destroy their families, destroy their children, destroy their education. For the sake of an ideology, for purity, you have to sacrifice the individual. You have to sacrifice one individual, hundreds of thousands of individuals, millions of individuals, destroy their lives, destroy their livelihoods. This is the evil of their ideology. This is how you know that the ideology is false. It's not godly, it's not emes. This part you can keep. What's the sign of emes? The sign that Judaism is divine and it's truly godly? We never ever sacrifice the individual for the sake of it. There's a law, halach, Judaism. If a city of 1 million people are surrounded by the enemy, and they tell us, hand us over one person, we'll kill him and we'll spare all of you. If not, we're going to kill all of you. What does Jewish law say? Let the entire city die. You have no right. Fight, defend yourself. You have no right to become a murderer, to save your life at the expense of one person. This is emes. Because if every soul is infinite, if life is divine, life comes from within. All the scientists in the world can't create the life of a fly. Life is miraculous, it's divine. We're not machines. Life is godly. One life, one times infinity, 6 million times infinity equal the same. If you can destroy one life, then you can destroy 6 million. If you can't destroy 6 million, you can't destroy one life. If life is sacred, every life is sacred, every individual. The entire sun is just as equally reflected in one drop of the ocean, just like it's reflected by the entire ocean. Every drop reflects the whole entire sun. Every one of us reflects Hashem, the infinite Hashem himself. The entire 10 Commandments with the thunder and lightning, it only happened once, it will never happen again. Revelation. Hashem speaks in the singular. Hashem is not addressing himself to the whole community. Hashem says, I am your God, your personal God. All that thunder and lightning is relevant and applicable to each individual Jew. This is the whole revolution of modern physics. And in the tiniest, in the atom is just as infinite and just as infinitely complex as the whole universe. And if you approach the atom properly, you can unleash tremendous power and energy. Because you can find the infinite even in the tiniest. If something is emes, then it's 100%. If something is emes, then even 1% of it reflects the whole thing. If it's essence, if it's core and essential in essence, even the tiniest it reflects the whole. And that's why if the entire Jewish people together could bring Mashiach, then that means that one Jew doing one single mitzvah could also single-handedly bring Mashiach. That one single mitzvah has the power to reveal the emes, the emes of this world, the true core nature of this world. This world is essentially nothing other than the true essence of Hashem. It comes from the true essence of Hashem. Power of one mitzvah, the power of one individual, the power of one Jew. So you can never hide behind ideology to beat up at another person, harm another person. Now, if that individual is harming the community is allowed to defend themselves. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to harm another person. The moment you pursue another person and try to kill him or to rape him, you forfeited the privilege of life. Life is a privilege. Hashem did not give you life in order to harm another person. The moment you lift up a finger to harm another person, or to kill another person, to rape another person, or you're damaging the community, you're harming the community, you're informing on the community, then the community has an obligation to defend itself. And the bystanders also have an obligation to stop this would-be pursuer, this would-be murderer, this would-be musser, to stop him, even if it means taking his life, if that's the only way you can stop him. Because that person has forfeited his privilege of life. You have no rights, you have privilege. God gave you the privilege of life if you're going to use your life productively, follow the 7 Noahide laws, and live a moral, ethical, and spiritual righteous life. But the community is never allowed to sacrifice it. On the other hand, the individual can't just live for himself. The individual is part of the whole. We're part of the whole is greater than the sum total of its parts. We're all part of something larger than all of us put together. We're part of Klal Yisrael. We're part of every Jew that ever lived, every Jew that's alive today, every Jew that will ever live. Moses can live in isolation, as great as he is. He needs 9 simple Jews to make a minyan, to connect with Hashem, to read the Torah, to make a blessing, and to say Kaddish, and to daven with a minyan, to sanctify Hashem. You need to connect and plug in with the community. Aaron has to be married and plugged into the community in order to enter into the Holy of Holies on the holiest day, in order for the holiest Jew to enter. Only he has to plug into the community, he has to belong and be part of the community. You don't live in isolation. So the individual has to be as part of the community. The community has to completely respect the individual. Just like the Torah scroll. It's like a paradox, just like a Torah scroll. On one hand, in order for a Torah scroll to be kosher, it has to have every letter. If one letter is missing, any letter, then Shema Yisrael, you can't read Shema Yisrael. Shem Elokeinu Hashem. Because if one letter is missing, the whole entire Torah is invalid. You stop the reading in public, you tie the Torah on the outside, you take it to the ark, right after Shabbos, you fix it as soon as you can, and you take out another Torah. On the other hand, if 2 letters are touching each other, Torah is also invalid. Every letter has to be surrounded by white space, it has to be separate, distinct, unique, apart. So you have to be in one Torah scroll. Every letter is indispensable, and every letter is part of the whole. You can't live in isolation. On the other hand, you have to respect the space and the privacy and the uniqueness of each and every letter. And this is the paradox that we find in prayer when the Jew davens. On one hand, you're davening in the minyan. You're davening with the community. You're part of a community. In the synagogue, you have men, women, children, everyone is davening. But on the other hand, the climax of prayer, the Shemona Esrei, everyone has to daven silently, quietly, alone. You're not allowed to look to your right, to your left. No one is allowed to distract you. No one's allowed to walk in front of you. No distractions. No, you're totally focused on your conversation, your personal, private, intimate conversation with Hashem personally. Baruch Atah Hashem. Talking to Hashem direct. So it's like a paradox. You have the energy and the power of the community. On the other hand, it's a very personal and private affair. The community does not erase the individuality. And that's the reason we don't sit with our families when we daven. Because I'm not going to the theater. It's not a family affair. It's a very personal affair. I have a personal relationship with Hashem that transcends my relationship with my wife and my children. It's a very personal, very intimate. On the other hand, my family is here. We're all together under the same roof. We're all davening together. Just like the Korban Pesach. We're all together. The entire Jewish people were together, physically in the same place, in the same time, doing the same thing. And yet everyone was their own space and their own individuality and their own boundaries. It was that ultimate paradox. Because usually when you're in a communal space, it erases the individual. If you're in an individual space, you're out meditating on some mountaintop, and you erase the community. It's me, myself, and God. There's no one else. Here you have that perfect combination or that paradox. You have the community, and within the community, the individual is able to thrive as an individual. It doesn't take away from the individual, doesn't suppress the individuality. On the contrary, highlights the individuality, and the individuality doesn't suppress, doesn't take away from the fact that I am part of the community. I'm part of something larger than myself, and they both work hand in hand, and they both enhance each other. The individuality fuels the sense of community. The sense of community fuels the sense of individuality. This is the birth of Judaism. This is the birth of holiness. This is the sign of emes. This tells us we're touching something divine. This is real. This is emes. This is divine. It's squaring the circle. It's like quantum mechanics. It's an ultimate paradox. This is reality. This is how reality looks like. This is what reality looks like. This is what Hashem looks like. So that's the Pesach. So Kedoshim Kalid. So these three, the B'chor, the firstborn, and the Meiser and the Title. Pesach and the Paschal offering, Kedoshim Kalid. The sacrifice is a lesser saint. You can slaughter it anywhere in the court. You only need one sprinkling, any side of the altar, against the base of the altar. It has to be on the wall, but against the base of the altar, where it had a base, which was not on the south side, not on the eastern side, either on the northern side or on the western side. But has to be against the base. Shina v'chilos, but there's a difference how they read. Habchor, the b'chor is eaten. Only the kohenim are allowed to eat the b'chor. Sacred. A mice, the animal, the 10th animal that you tithe, you designated, you marked, you counted, and you marked, and you designated. And you offer in the temple you offer it in the temple as an offering, but anyone could eat. There's nothing sacred. You don't have to give any parts of it to the kohen. It totally belongs to the owner. In the cholim b'chalair, you can eat them, all three of them. You can eat all three of them anywhere in Jerusalem. Chol machol. You can eat it any way you like it. The B'chor and the Meiser, you can eat anywhere in Jerusalem. And you can eat it the day that you offer the sacrifice, that night and the next until evening. But a Pesach is different. Pesach sacrifice, you only can eat it at night. Unlike any other sacrifice. All other sacrifices that you You start eating it as soon as you offer it, the day they offer it. Pesach, no, you have to offer it the day, you have to wait. You can't touch it. You can't start eating it until it's night. The night that they left Egypt. You have to eat it the night that you left Egypt. So I can't eat it on the 14th in the afternoon. You could only eat it until midnight. And here we have an argument already, whether this is biblical or whether it's rabbinic. So when we said that in this chapter, but everyone holds you could only eat it until midnight. But here it seems to be saying that biblically you could only eat it up until midnight. Not the rabbi said. He said you could only eat it, but he doesn't leave it for last. He says, you're not allowed to eat it only till midnight. Previously, he said you can eat it till midnight. He's saying you're not allowed to eat it only until midnight. And it's biblical. Biblically, you're not allowed. That's the opinion of Rabbi Ben Azariah. Kiva argues and said that you could eat it all night. It's only the rabbis say you should only eat it until midnight. That's an argument amongst the Tanoim. But nevertheless, this chapter, there's no overt argument. He doesn't mention any overt argument. Not everything he says here follows everyone's opinion. Like in this example, this is one example. This is not unanimous opinion. Not everyone holds that biblically you must eat the sacrifice until until midnight, when they were freed. You also learned earlier, Siddur and Nisrafim, the he-goats which were burned, which is only according to the opinion that the only time they brought he-goats is only if the Jewish Supreme Court, if a Kohen made an erroneous ruling for himself regarding idolatry, he didn't bring a he-goat. He brought a regular she-goat. He brought a she-goat. The only time you bring, and you wouldn't burn it, it would be a regular sacrifice. The only time you bring a he-goat and that's burnt is only if the Jewish Supreme Court made an erroneous ruling regarding idolatry, no law regarding idolatry. And if the Jewish people follow that ruling, because of the Jewish Supreme Court, if you're not going to believe the Jewish Supreme Court, who are you going to believe exactly? And then they found out that they made a mistake. So they have to bring a he-goat and has to be burned. It has to be sprinkled in the inside of the temple. But he says it in the plural. He-goats in the plural. Why he-goats? It's not according to everyone. There's one opinion that says that every tribe had to bring a he-goat. The majority of the Jewish people sinned. Even if it was one tribe, the majority of the Jewish people happened to be one tribe that had a majority of the Jewish people, and they all sinned. Every tribe in Israel has to bring a he-goat. That's what he says in the plural. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense. Why are you saying in the plural? The bulls that he said in the plural, because that you can say is referring to the Kohen. If a Kohen makes a ruling, he also has to bring an erroneous ruling for himself, and he follows his own rule. He has to bring a bull. And if the Jewish Supreme Court makes an erroneous ruling for the entire Jewish people, they have to bring a bull. That's what he says in the plural. But the he-goat, which is only applies to the Jewish Supreme Court, why did he say in the plural? According to one opinion, the Jewish Supreme Court would bring one sacrifice. So he's following a certain opinion. So not everything he says in this chapter is agreed upon by everyone. But nevertheless, overtly, there's no argument. Just says it without bringing a single argument. I guess that's the effect of sacrifices. When you sacrifice, and you get out of your ego, there's much less machloikas. Marriages, and friendships, and business partnerships, and communities. The less ego, is much more friendliness. And people get along, and you lessen any argument. This chapter, there's no room for arguments. You're talking about sacrificing, getting close to Hashem, and elevating yourself, and sacrificing yourself, and suddenly there's no appetite for arguments. There's no mention of any argument. He says, the only ones who are allowed to eat it are those who are designated in the sacrifice before it was offered, the paschal sacrifice. The only allowed to eat it, barbecue. Can't cook it, can't eat it raw. Must be roasted like royally. Eat it like royally. Remember, commemorating the Exodus, the freedom, like royalty. We left Egypt. Now, the Rambam counts this as two separate mitzvahs. There's the mitzvah number 5 to offer the sacrifice. Mitzvah number 6 to eat the sacrifice. The question is, the Rambam gives us a rule. All the commentaries ask, the Rambam gives us a rule that 14 routes, 14 ways, he explains to us how we got to the number 613 mitzvahs. You read the Torah, there's thousands and thousands of commandments. How do you get to 613? He explains his rules, what you count, what you don't count. One of the rules is that you don't count portions of a mitzvah. Many, many parts to a mitzvah. I'm not going to count. There's elements to a mitzvah, and there's portions of a mitzvah, like bringing the sacrifice. So there's many steps. There's many parts of bringing the sacrifice. You have to slaughter it. You have to receive the blood. You have to sprinkle the blood. You have to offer the animal. I'm not going to count it as 4 separate mitzvahs. If you're going to start counting like that, I don't have 613 mitzvahs. I have maybe 6,000 mitzvahs. These are one of the rules, one of the principles. The question is, everyone wondering, why did the Rambam count these as 2 separate mitzvahs? Sacrifice the animal, the Pesach, and eat the Pesach sacrifice. All the other sacrifices, he doesn't list every sacrifice as a separate mitzvah. There's one general mitzvah that the kohen has to eat the sacrifice because that's part of the atonement process, whether it's a guilt offering, a sin offering. So there's a mitzvah for the kohen to eat. He's fulfilling a mitzvah. But it includes all the sacrifices. Why is there a separate mitzvah for the Pesach? Mitzvah number 5 and mitzvah number 6. There's a mitzvah to slaughter the animal. There's a mitzvah to eat the animal. They asked this from the son of the Rambam. The Rebbe explained his answer that the reason is because what we just learned here. The eating of the Pesach is unique. Yeah, it's true. The whole purpose of the sacrifice is in order to eat it. That's why if you bring the sacrifice in impurity, let's say the majority of the Jewish people were impure, and then it overrides the impurity, you're allowed to bring it in a state of impurity, you're allowed to eat it in a state of impurity. Because the whole purpose of the sacrifice is to eat. So it emphasizes how much more so that it's one mitzvah. It should be one mitzvah. I'm sacrificing in order to eat. Although, if you bring the sacrifice, if you don't bring a Paschal lamb, your life gets cut off. You get a chance to make up for it in the second Pesach. But other than that, your life gets cut off. The sin, it's one of the only positive mitzvah that if you don't do the positive mitzvah, a sin of omission, and your life gets cut off, you get such a strict penalty. It's a bris if you don't circumcise, and if you don't bring a Paschal lamb, a Paschal sacrifice. What if you bring the Paschal sacrifice and you don't eat from it? Your life doesn't get cut off. You violated the mitzvah, your life doesn't get cut off. So you see, it's not the same, but still, that's not reason enough to explain. I think that's what Rabbi Avram wants to explain to his father, but that's not reason enough to explain, because ultimately the whole purpose of the sacrifice is to eat it. So even though eating is not a deal breaker, nevertheless, it doesn't matter. Even parts of the mitzvah that are not a deal breaker, it's part of one mitzvah. It's all the same mitzvah, so it should be counted as one mitzvah. Slaughter and eating. Why is it counted as a separate mitzvah? So the Rebbe explains because like we just read, since when it comes to the eating of the Paschal sacrifice, there's so many restrictions, there's so many mitzvahs surrounding it. All the other sacrifices, you eat it. Eat it however you want. There's no restrictions, no limit. Anyone can eat from it. You can eat it however you want. Here, you have to eat at night and not during the day, till midnight. You have to, only those who are counted, who are designated on it, who are members in this sacrifice. They have to eat it in the group. They can only eat at barbecue. There's so many mitzvahs in the eating. So since there's so many mitzvahs, there's so many parameters and mitzvahs that the Torah gives to eat, so you see that the eating is a mitzvah in itself. separate and apart from the mitzvah of offering the Pesach. So we just concluded the 5th chapter of the Bachim. So we fulfilled an essential part. Every morning we fulfill an essential part of studying Torah. First we read from the Torah, from the 5 books of Moshe. Now every morning we learn a whole chapter in the laws of sacrifices, from Mishnayos. We learn a Mishnayos, which is so essential. Mishnah comes from the word Neshama. It's so essential for a Jew to fulfill our obligation to study Torah. And next week we're going to learn the opening of Torah's Kohanim, which is like the Gemara. So we fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah. We also, every day, we learn a little Gemara. We say this every day, but we'll leave it already. We'll start next week with Hashem's help. And it will be very nice to know. It's about the 13 measures, how we learn Torah, how we derive everything from the Torah. It's the introduction and the opening to the book of Leviticus. And it's actually very, very good to know and very essential. And every morning you can fulfill your obligation to study Torah. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Very thorough.
A what? If he can't eat, he's too sick. If you know initially that you can't eat, then it can't be part of the sacrifice. The whole purpose of sacrifice is to eat. You know initially that you can't eat, you can't bring a sacrifice. But if he can't, he can. If he can't, he can. It's an oinus. Passover. Passover, only the Passover. So he can eat whatever. He'll try the next time. He'll try Pesach Sheni. Okay, to be continued. Everyone have a good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Rabbi. Yesh Chayil.
Listen, if we can daven with a little more kavanah, it's all worth it. But now it takes a little longer.